Why being single is so expensive in the United States. Let's go ahead and get into it.
Nearly half of all U.S. adults are single today. That number has been steadily rising for several decades. Nearly 70% of men and about 65% of women were married in 1960. Today, it's just over 50% of men and around 50% of women who are married.
Young people are getting married later, if they get married at all. There are also people, of course, in unmarried partnerships, but I think that a lot of that really is people who are not ever going to be permanently partnered.
117.6 million Americans aged 18 and over never married, are divorced, or widowed.
Dang.
They're not single for the usual reasons that you hear. Oh, there's not enough marriageable men for women or any of those kinds.
Absolutely second that. They're not single because they don't want to be. They're single because the ridiculous standards that men and women have both put on the opposite sex. It's ridiculous, right? If you're not making over six figures, if you're not over 6 feet, if you don't have a six pack, if you don't have a BBL, like, what are we really coming to and what are we really expecting from a mate, right? You think it's more expensive to be single, but imagine if you weren't single, you were with somebody, you got married, and then you got divorced. What's more expensive?
Instead, that they find single life fulfilling.
As someone single living in a major city like New York, it's definitely very stressful when it comes to personal finances. You have the full burden on your shoulders. So I would say the majority of my friends who are single and live alone, they're very stressed about the cost of living.
A 2023 survey revealed that the top 3 stressors for single Americans, excluding Gen Z, were all financial. 39% said they were stressed about the general state of the economy. 38% said it was their long-term financial future, while 35% blamed the effects of inflation.
So when I went to New York like 5 months ago, right? And I was in a cab in an Uber and I was talking to the Uber driver. Amazing story, actually came over to the US and he said he made $100,000 driving Uber. But after taxes in New York and after all his expenses and all that stuff, he said it was literally like $40,000. We all know the economy is bad, but certain states, obviously, of course, have a higher cost of living. When I was in New York and being at a hotel down there, a standard size hotel at that time, it was like $300 just for a night. Like, it was ridiculous. All the food was super expensive. I'm like, I don't even understand how somebody can live in New York right now. I know the wage is higher, but it was extremely high. So he was talking about how he wanted to move to Atlanta. He wanted to move to Georgia. And I was like, bro, like, it's not that much of a difference. The income's going to be down a little bit, but your expenses is still high. The average home out here, you're looking at a 3-bedroom home, you're probably going to pay $2,500 or more. So people are struggling, man. Definitely being single, I can see how that could possibly make you feel like it's a lot cheaper. But when you get into this dating scene and you're trying to spend money on dates and you're trying to court the other person and trying to have a relationship, I don't know if I totally agree with this. Maybe having a partner might be cheaper, again, unless you're divorced.
A lot of consternation, especially at early ages and later ages, with being single and independent, and how much you might need to ask others for help, both as an optional idea or as a literal idea to ensure you're going to be okay.
So what's causing so much financial anxiety among single Americans? Singles tax is a newly coined term referring to the financial burdens that are uniquely incurred by single people.
I definitely think there is a singles tax. It's much more expensive to be single than to be in a relationship.
If you're single and living alone, you don't get the economies of scale. So instead of having a partner to split expenses with, you cover everything yourself.
So you don't have a partner to split expenses with you, but you also don't have a partner to add more expenses to your plate. So it's a give or take on which one that you're going with,
which ranks right in the middle among all states in terms of cost of living. MIT calculates that the typical expenses for 2 working adults with no children total around $47,483 a year. By contrast, a single adult with no children has estimated expenses of $29,880 annually. that means a single individual has at least $6,000 more in expenses per year compared to individuals who are splitting their bills with their partner.
I have to cover all of my living expenses, medical costs. There's really no splitting the bill, which is what's so nice about having a partner or being in a relationship.
Break down the typical expense even further, and you can see that nearly every type of expenses, apart from medical, is cheaper per person for couples who have the luxury of splitting the check.
Food is $327 more. I'm surprised medical is more based on this video, right? Medical right now is ridiculous. If I feel for you if you don't have health insurance right now, it's a killer, man. I'm telling you. Like, I was seeing the medical insurance was anywhere between $1,500 to $3,000 just for medical insurance. Like, I can see why they don't want those books out there that cure the common cold and all that stuff, because if people don't get sick, they not making money. But this chart is crazy. Transportation, $551 more. Let me know what your thoughts in the middle of this. Is it more expensive to be single, or is it more expensive to be with a partner?
Maintaining your household costs a lot more money now than it did about 5 or 10 years ago. And when you're single, there's no one that you can share and spread those costs along with.
The biggest expense among them is housing. A 2023 analysis by Zillow revealed that renters pay a singles tax of nearly $7,000 a year for living alone. And in major cities like New York City, that number can be as high as $19,500.
Just talking about that, New York.
My largest expense is actually my housing. So my rent takes up the majority of my expenses. It's definitely challenging finding an apartment and securing housing in New York City as a single person because, one, the rent is so high.
The obvious reasons that housing is a bigger share of single people's expenses is simply that there's one person living per housing unit versus two or more people living per housing unit. But I think it goes beyond that. Single people may be more likely to live in expensive cities like New York or San Francisco, where we have housing crises. Housing in general has become a big problem around the country, and I think it is especially acute for single people in urban areas.
The cost of living in New York City has definitely made me and my friends reconsider why we do live here and what we're actually investing in. Because if you don't have a lot of extra money to spend, if you're spending it all on your rent and your bills, and you can't really go out, or you can't really enjoy the arts and culture and activities that are all around New York City, why are you here?
Inflation has also played a...
Okay, I can understand that. Like moving to New York and not experiencing the culture and wanting to go out and wanting to spend money, right? But if you're single, you should be working on improving yourself, working on your income, your mental health, your fitness, all those other things, right? You should be working on improving yourself so you can find that mate if you want one, so you don't have to be single, right? That's a lot of problem with a lot of people. A lot of people are trying to impress people that they don't even like. They're trying to spend money that they don't have, and then they're wondering why they don't have money down the road, right? The thing is, I'd rather look poor and be wealthy than look wealthy and don't have no money. It's a big difference.
It's really hard to control your housing expense, and it's really hard to control your food expense because they are necessities. Things like clothing, entertainment, they have more variability, but these fixed expenses really do contribute to that singles tax, and unfortunately, that's where inflation is hitting the hardest right now.
But it's not just expenses that are stacked against single people.
Financial advantages for married couples.
Now that is true.
Right into the laws of the land.
The most prominent example is the income tax.
Again, that is true. There are tax advantages for a married couple. Again, if you're married. But once you get married and if you get a divorce, all that goes out the window. That's the most expensive expense that you're going to ever have if you get divorced.
MIT's calculator, the typical tax expense for a single adult with no children is about 44% higher than the split expense from two working adults with no children.
It used to be that tax brackets were structured in such a way that if two people were earning money and then they combined their incomes, they would actually pay more taxes after they were married.
This marriage tax penalty was largely eliminated for all but certain states and high-income earners. following the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act under the Trump administration.
There's really no longer a marriage penalty. The standard deduction is basically double the single deduction. The time that being married does benefit you financially is if you do have one spouse that earns more than the other. You have someone who's making $200,000 and your spouse is making $400,000. Now that does benefit you.
This income gap could result in bigger tax breaks that are reserved for couples with children.
If there's a disparity in income between spouses, now you may qualify for certain tax credits that you could not qualify on your own or get a higher amount, like the child tax care credit. The amount you get is dependent upon your income. Or if you're paying for child care, there's the dependent care credit. So there are
Don't even get me started on child care.
You, if you're married and you bring your incomes together and one spouse has lower income than the other, that now qualifies you for a specific tax credit and benefit.
When I was working at Amazon as an operations manager, I had to have somebody come to my house and watch my son. My son is 2 years old now. Like, I was literally spending almost $250 a day. And I was working 12 hours. $250 a day. Like, I felt like I was in the wrong profession. My son is a pretty good kid, too. Wasn't a lot that you had to do to take care of him. $250 a day, easily over $4,000 a month just for childcare. I can only imagine if you're single and you got to pay for childcare. Like, where's that money coming from?
A 2023 survey revealed that 74% of singles disliked paying more taxes than married couples. And 79% said they'd like to see the government offer more tax breaks for single people. Social Security is another policy that favors those who are married.
You're able to, at times, take your spouse's Social Security benefit if it's higher than yours. So let's say
I didn't know that.
Lifetime, you earn
$50,000
a year on average. Your spouse earned $150,000 a year. When your spouse passes away and you're married, or you're married for at least 10 years, you now have the option of taking that higher Social Security benefit, even though it's not based on your income.
I feel like if you are single, you get to choose what expenses you live on and what you don't live on. Like, you can really lower your expenses really low because you don't have to worry about what the other person needs, right? If you don't do like Netflix and have to have all this fancy health insurance because you very rarely get sick, right? You can have a real small car, gas, eating out and groceries, multiple things like that. But on the other hand, having a spouse or having somebody there with you, you can always split their expenses. But let me know how you feel about, is it cheaper to be single or is it cheaper to be married or with somebody?